Suppose we changed the way we do an organized business so it worked like this. Monday through Thursday, you come to work at your job, and you do what you always did, your specific task, your skill, your specialty. On Friday, you come to work, just like you normally do, but you don't do your specific task. On Friday, you come, and at 9 o'clock, you sit down with all the other workers in your enterprise, whether they be 10 or 1,000. And you spend the day in meetings, and you decide what to produce, how to produce, where to produce, and what to do with the profits your work generates. In short, on Friday, you become the collective board of directors of your own enterprise. Everything would change. Every decision would change. But one of the great switches in the American economy that brought on this crisis was the end of rising wages in America around 1970s, when they flattened out and never rose again. If workers had run their own enterprises in the United States in the 1970s, that would not have happened. Workers would have gone on raising their wages, their real wages, as had been done for 150 years in America before that time. They would have raised their wages because their productivity was going up, as it did. They would have kept on sharing in their own rising productivity, as had been the case before. And then they wouldn't have had to borrow all that money. And we wouldn't have had the financial speculations built on that. We would have lived in a different kind of economic system. We wouldn't be living in a system in which the key decisions corporations make are made by a tiny group of people, a board of directors, 15 to 20 people, usually selected by the major shareholders of a corporation, another group of 15 or 20 people. They decide, those tiny groups, what to produce, how to produce, where to produce, and what to do with the profits. And we live in an economic system that is the result of the decisions they make. And one of the first things that ought to occur to Americans is if the pattern of outcomes from those kinds of decisions are as systematically dysfunctional as they have been and now are, that the minimum reasonable thing to do among the questions we ask as a people is, ought we to question and change the way we organize doing business? If all the workers in an enterprise participate in the decision, there's a name for that. It's called democracy. It's a democratic way of organizing production. If you believe in democracy, I would want you to ask yourself a question. Does your belief in democracy mean it only happens outside the workplace, but not inside? And where did you get that idea from? Did Thomas Jefferson write, only here, but not there? Not that I know of. It is our culture that celebrates democracy outside the workplace and somehow has decided it doesn't belong inside the workplace.
I think introducing the idea of workplace democracy is it's one of those roads we have to go down. And, I think eventually if we're going to call this a democracy, you can't call it a democracy if we just get to vote every 2 or 4 years and then just say, oh, that's the democracy. There's got to be there's got to be democracy in the workplace. There's got to be democracy in our economy. A few hundred years from now, assuming the planet makes it that long, they're going to look at us and they're going to think we were idiots. The way we look at people 150 years ago putting leeches on their body when they were sick, and we laugh at that. I think they're going to laugh at us. Look at these people. They were running around saying they lived in a democracy, and yet they spent 8 to 10 hours a day in a dictatorship where they had no say. Mm-hmm. And then as consumers in an economy, they were led to believe they had a say by what they bought.
Can you have, worker self-management in industry? I mean, I don't know of any law that says you can't, law of nature that says you can't, or law of history. And I think that'd be a lot better than management control. Can you have something better than the state capitalist institutions that we have? Yeah, we can design lots of others. In fact, we can go back to the workers in the mills in Lawrence, Mass., who took for granted that those who work in the mills should own them and should run them democratically. Is that so outlandish? And you can say the same about communities and so on. Like take the problem of management and ownership control in a tyrannical system, like a business. Business is a tyranny. Okay, it's like a Soviet Union. It's got control from the top. If you're in the middle, you take orders from above and you hand them down below. At the very bottom, you're allowed to rent yourself to it. Now, it's not obvious why things have to work like that. It could be democratically controlled by the participant. No owners, no managers, just those who participate. And in fact, there could be a broader participation. So it's somewhere. It's in a community. And the community should have some say in it. So you have community participation and participation on the part of the workforce. That's perfectly feasible. In fact, there are plenty of ideas that have been around like that for a long time, and some of them have been worked out. So is the question that we have to ask ourselves is, well, is that an alternative? Is it a possible alternative? Sure it is. Is it the kind of possible alternative we want to work for? If it is, it would dismantle capitalism. But we have to decide, is that what we want, or is that what other people want? I mean, is that what the workers in the plant want? My guess is that most people are ready for it this minute. And that if the opportunity arises, they'd leap at it. I mean, I don't think they need us to encourage them. It's just that, the options aren't there. For an individual, for people in a plant to do it means taking a very serious risk. So the first risk will be that the Royal Canadian Mounted Police or whatever the counterpart is will come in and beat the shit out of them, That's a risk. And unless they have community support, they're not going to get away with it. So it's a struggle. That's a class struggle. But if you ask, if you talk to workers in a plant, I don't think many of them would find this very hard to understand, that they ought to run it themselves. I mean, they can understand it as much as the, factory girls in Lowell in 1860. I think that's just below the surface in all groups that I've ever had anything to do with.
The anarchists had no doubt about their main objective, to defeat fascism. But for them, the campaign was not just against the army rebels, but against capitalism itself. While the columns surged out to defeat the enemy, committees of workers in the town struggled to construct a new order out of the confusion.
At that time, it seemed impossible to solve those initial difficulties, but looking back, people really showed a lot of common sense. Everything was improvised. You could call it a miracle. Despite the religious meaning of the word, it was a miracle achieved by the ordinary people.
As the chaos subsided, this new revolutionary society began to function. Much of the Catalan economy was now being run by the workers themselves. In Barcelona, trams and cinemas, factories, department stores, and even greyhound tracks were run by their own employees. The trade unions saw to food supplies. Union lorries drove out to the villages with goods to exchange for food. Barter, not purchasing, kept Barcelona fed for the first weeks of the Civil War. In some places, money itself, seen by anarchists as inherently evil, was abolished. Shopping was done with vouchers, issued by local committees.
What do these vouchers represent? Well, they had to represent hours of production. The hours spent by a carpenter building a piece of furniture, or the hours spent by a peasant harvesting, working on the fields. Everything was calculated in hours of production. The peasants liked it because it meant making them equal to the industrial workers, making all work equal.
Vouchers bought bread at the baker's, but they now also bought lunch at the Barcelona Ritz. The big hotels have been turned into hospitals, or into canteens serving cheap meals to militiamen and working-class families, as this anarchist newsreel proclaimed.
En sus grandes cocinas se prepara la comida para cuantos van al hotel a saciar su apetito. Los amplios comedores que antes ocupaban maquilladas y frívolas damiselas, grandes financieros, capitanes de industria, aristócratas ociosos y aventureros internacionales de toda la haya, ahora están abarrotados de hombres y mujeres humildes que siguen el ritmo de la sociedad que se está creando. Barcelona trabaja y come, esa es su fuerza y su virtud.
Now that the factories and workplaces were in the hands of the workers, anarchist union leaders like Josep Costa fought to start production again.
We tell the workers to get back to the factory and wait for our instructions. Immediately we called all the factory owners and executives to a meeting at the town hall. We tell them, well, gentlemen, something big has happened here. You don't know what's going to happen, but the factories have to continue functioning. We ask you to be at work again tomorrow at whatever hour you're supposed to start. 5 o'clock or 8 o'clock. Agreed? Agreed. But we have to warn you, labor relations will be very different from now on.
The CNT, the anarchist trade union, had been taken by surprise when the revolution began. It was anarchist militants who rallied the workers to take over their industries. Where the old bosses remained, they had to take orders from these workers' committees. Nearly 2,000 enterprises were collectivized in Catalonia, the greatest experiment in workers' self-management Western Europe has ever seen. The workers now set about improving their working conditions. Free medical care and adequate pensions were introduced.